We want to leave Los Angeles in the 20th century. And in order to go back in time, we have to relax. And when we relax, the hold of the impetuousness of the moment lessens. And as soon as we notice that, we have a clue for ourselves that if we relax even more, that the hold of time on us lessens somewhat. It's like in the Arabian Nights, there's a story in the cycle of the Sinbad stories, where Sinbad finds himself in a very difficult situation where an old man has fastened his legs around Sinbad's neck and is sitting on his shoulders. And he says, "You must now go where I want to go, or I will choke you to death." And Sinbad cannot get rid of this old man on his shoulders, with his knotted old legs choking just right at the exact spot, the neck. And he tries everything, and finally realizes that the only chance he has, since the old man does not seem to see, but the old man has curiosity. That's why he has attached himself to Sinbad, because he thinks that Sinbad is adventurous. He does a lot of interesting things. He wants to be there. His curiosity. And so Sinbad waits until the old man has his attention fixed on something else for a split second, throws him off, and gets free. We need to learn to do that in terms of the compulsiveness of the line of events, the conveyor belt. We have to do this, we have to do that, and because we have done this, this must be done. And because that has been done, then these must be done. And this rather compulsive flow, the amperage of which is called karma, but actually it's a temporal succession. It's the push of time. In order to go back in time, we have to relax and not let this particular moment be attached to the conveyor belt of ongoing events. And we know that we can suspend our need temporarily. We can detach a moment. We can take a little time out. Well, now we're not going to be worrying about where we're going at 9 o'clock. Let that take care of itself. But now, it's not just 7 o'clock, but it's a time for timelessness. And the capacity of our spirit to open out in this timelessness is described very frequently as growing the wings of the soul back, so that we can rise above this world, not geographically rise, like some stupid idea of levitation. You can levitate kinesthetically with very powerful yogas, but the object is not to levitate, but to not pay any attention to that kind of kinesthetic quality of the body, to let it all go. To be proud that one can levitate is beside the point. The whole point is to be unattached, not attached. And time, the unattachment to time, disarms this egoistic person who is riding on our shoulders, who is using us as beast of burden, who is using us as entertainment, as a protagonist, as something other than ourselves. In the Tao Te Ching, this whole quality is talked about as the true person, when we are unattached, when we have unhooked our sense of presence from the worldly line of events, then the true person occurs. And when the true person occurs, what occurs with you then is what is purely natural, nature in and of itself, which has its own movement, but a movement which is not temporal. It has a movement that is mysterious because it doesn't need to go anywhere. And so the Chinese term for this movement that doesn't go anywhere is Zhijiang. Zhijiang. Zhijiang means self-soness or pure naturalness. And it is a conditionless quality that characterizes the true person. In the Tao Te Ching, and then in the sense of understanding Tao after that, this movement was seen to go through the 5-phase energy cycle and return back to the Tao. About 350 years after Lao Tzu, a group of Chinese persons in the early Han Dynasty gathered together like this in someone's home, the home of Liu An, and they discussed the meaning of the Tao Te Ching, much like we're doing here. This was 2,200 years ago. What came out of those discussions was a series of writings that were collected together and published in a book called the Huainan Zi, because Liu An was the prince of the district of China called Huainan. In the Huainan Zi, about the time of the Han Dynasty, a cosmological outlook based on the Tao Te Ching was matured by these very individuals. 4 points distinguished this cosmology. The first point concerned qi, or ki, that matter energy occurs, that ki, or qi, actually occurs, and that a concomitant of qi occurring is that there is a resonance that also occurs, a resonance. Now, the Chinese term for this, which we'll look into a little later, I guess I won't introduce it right now. We don't need to know the Chinese term. There is qi, and because there is qi, there is resonance. And resonance has a sympathy between different formations of matter and energy. And formations that are similar resonate together. And the classical demonstration of this was that if you take 2 lutes into a room and you pluck a certain note on one of the lutes, that note tends to vibrate in sympathy on the other lute. The string will vibrate with it. But a concomitant to that, a parallel happening to that, if you take an untuned lute and just pluck any string, all of the strings on the other lute will vibrate. So from this, there was the realization that there is a specific relative resonance, and there was a general total resonance, which in this world, in the world of time, is indiscriminate. The Taoist realization was that only the true person could bring the total resonance into its harmony. That this world does not record total resonance, but only specific relative resonances. So there are only correspondences in this world, but no true harmony. Only when there is a true person present is harmony possible. Harmony being all of the correspondences possible brought together in one. All of the strings, all of the notes on all of the strings sounded at the same time. So that key occurs. This energy occurs and it involves matter. But matter, by its nature and its structure, operates on a relative correspondent term and does not respond in and of itself in this world to that harmony. Unless someone who is a true person is present, they then harmonize all of the harmonies, and matter itself, energy itself, comes into such sync with the equilibrium of the true person that the true person, in returning back to Tao, takes the world with them. Now you can put it in religious terms and say that the true person therefore is the savior of the world. Without a true person, the world would be in this kind of random condition. Not because it's in a chaos, but because it must exist in a specific relativity. It must have parts of it correspondent to other parts. Now the third quality that came out of this, the first is that there's ki. The second, that there is this resonance, kan yin. The third is that in this movement of specific relativity, relating it to the possible harmony, that's where yin and yang come in, because they are alternate. So that the idea of an alternating principle of change, yin and yang, comes to characterize the correspondent quality of this world, and it's sympatheia on the basis of shared ki. And then the fourth principle was that there is a succession of phases, this 5-phase energy cycle that allows for whole systems of correspondence to be brought into play, or whole ecologies, as we would say, of correspondence brought into play. So that, for instance, in meridians of Chinese acupuncture, there is a spleen meridian, kidney meridian, so that all of the correspondences group themselves together into systems or patterns. And the rest of Chinese history, the last 2,000 years, have been working out how to make the correspondences of relative within system aspects of this world codified. How do we understand the vocabulary of this world? The same thing characterizes the occult West, where astrological signs and musical notes were related together. And when it was rediscovered in the Renaissance, you had a whole different outlook of music. Medieval Western music comes from the kind of theorizing that someone like Boethius would do. But Renaissance music comes from a realization that there is a possible patterning of correspondence, and that one can elicit whole realms of feeling tone. And the difference between Gregorian chant and Palestrina is among another difference. And all of a sudden, you have a musical form like the motet that comes into play, where human voices arranged in very specific pattern sounds evokes very specific complex feeling tones. And finally, by the late 16th century, someone like Sir Thomas Tallis, for the coronation of Elizabeth I of England in the 1570s, wrote a 40-part motet. More parts than the human ear can possibly physically distinguish. But one could train oneself in very high logical form of the 16th century to understand the differentiation of 40 parts. So one could hear the motet in one's mind and allow for the feeling tones, which are very gorgeous with that motet, to come and participate with the intellectual structure. This, of course, in the England of that day, came a new kind of personality, able to feel on the breadth of someone like William Shakespeare. Lao Tzu is such a human being. He's like Shakespeare. He is not like Palestrina, someone who has just recently made the discovery, but he is someone who comes later and develops this discovery to a cosmic level. Now, the individuals who discovered these correlations lived at the beginning of the Zhou dynasty, about 1100 BC. Lao Tzu writes the Tao Te Ching about 500 BC. So there was about 600 years of development. Very long time for it to be refined. And so with Lao Tzu, we have to understand that though he's at the beginning of what the lineage of Taoism talks about, he is really the flower, the late flowering, the synthesis of a whole development of genius in China. When one comes to resonance, Kanying, the important quality in Taoism is the acid test of someone who has come into their true person, their spiritual gem, has the ability to return to the origin, such an origin that differentiation has not yet occurred. It's as if, to put it in Western Christian terms, that one could go back before Adam to the bosom of God. One could go back to the original nature. And later on, of course, this becomes developed when Chinese Taoism interfaces with Indian Buddhism. The Indian Enlightenment fuses with the return to the original nature. And one then has something like Chan Buddhism at the time of Huineng, the 600 AD. Here is the way in which this would be talked about. Those Zhou Chinese in 1100 BC, personified here by King Wu and the Duke of Luoyang, had kept their nature intact, preserved their genuineness, and avoided injury to their person, when they met with crises and were pressed by difficulties, their essences merged with heaven, as if they had not yet begun to emerge from their origin. How could they not succeed then in all their undertakings? Now that's a quotation from an ancient Chinese classic, 3,000 years ago. And this is what it means. If we bring ourselves into an equilibrium where the yin-yang is no longer in an alternating mode, but comes together, concentrated. Let's use the example of the difference from this incandescent light to a laser's light. All of the photons in this incandescent light are rather scattered. You can't get a clear diffraction pattern on anything sensitive. But in a laser light, all of the photons are lined together. They're all in sync. It's this kind of equilibrium of yin and yang that the true person manages to do. And they bring into the presence then of this world that kind of concentration, that orderly sympathy of energy, which for its effect does not depend upon how much power it has, but only on the purity. Its alignment is not to extend its line, but to be pure in every single photon of that light, so that the purity of it determines its effectiveness. If one tries to push or pull any aspect of it, you lose it all. So that power is the antithesis of what you're engendering. Thus it is characterized in the Tao as effortless. One has an equilibrium which is effortless. Now, if you see people practicing Tai Chi Chuan or something, there's all of this movement, and you're to be balanced in this movement. And if you're a Levi Dervish, I suppose that you can find a motionless balance, but it's very difficult if one takes those movements. It's very distracting. Whereas in the Tao Te Ching, chapter 5, emptiness is function, gives us Lao Tzu speaking exactly to this conditionless condition. The balancing of yin and yang so that an effortlessness occurs. And in the purity of that, we bring into time-space an organizing of energy, just like a laser would organize photons. Here's how Lao Tzu, in the translation of Chu Ta Kao, this is made in 1938 originally for the Buddhist Society in London. This is how he translates it. Heaven and earth do not own their benevolence. To them all things are straw dogs. The sage does not own his benevolence. To him, the people are straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth is like a blacksmith's bellows. Hollow as it seems, nothing is lacking. If it is moved, more will it bring forth. He who talks more is sooner exhausted. It is better to keep what is within himself. All right, an American poet, Richard Biner, writing in Taos, New Mexico, made this translation about the end of the Second World War. Same chapter. Nature, immune as to a sacrifice of straw dogs, faces the decay of its fruits. A sound man immune as to a sacrifice of straw dogs, faces the passing of human generations. The universe is like a bellows. It is always empty, always full. The more it yields, the more it holds. Men come to their wits' end arguing about it, and had better meet it at the morrow. Okay, and one more translation, Chan Shamyuan, using a Martin Heidegger German phenomenological outlook, translates it, heaven and earth are not benevolent. They treat 10,000 things indifferently. The wise is not benevolent. He treats men indifferently. The universe is basically void, like a bellows. When it is in non-action, it does not lack anything. When it is in action, it is even more productive. Debating with words leads to limitations. Therefore, nothing is better than to remain in the state before things are stirred. Now, these are 3 published translations, and rather widely read. They indicate, like a teenager's droodles, but they do not speak in the way that Lao Tzu speaks. He is talking about emptiness as function, when yin and yang, in their alternation, are brought into such a vast, equanimous sync that in the purity of that presence, Tao occurs, and coursing through the spiritual person carries the world back to its origins. Here's how Lao Tzu speaks to that in my translation. Heaven, earth, not Jen. Thereby the 10,000 things, busy straw dogs. Spirit, Jen, not Jen. Thereby the 100 families, busy straw dogs. Heaven, earth, its space itself is like a billows indeed. Empty yet not collapse. Moves yet continues emerging. A boaster frequently emptied, not likely to retain this middle. Now the phrase in here, to Greg, straw dogs. You know, when you have archery, sometimes your targets are made out of straw. You may have a concentric circular target on straw, but in old times they would make straw figures like that of a man or a dog or something, and it would be just a target. It would be an image just to shoot at. It's a way of talking about being unconscious about the world, so that things in this world to you are just targets. They're just straw dogs. People are not really who they are. Things do not disclose their usefulness. And so Lao Tzu here says, heaven, earth, not Jen, thereby the 10,000 things, busy straw dogs. That is to say, when the ultimate correspondence of heaven, earth, and man is the balance between heaven and earth, when that ultimate heaven, earth is not in sympathy, is not in balance, then the 10,000 things, the world of things, is just like a lot of busyness with straw dogs. No one is paying any attention to anything, and nothing, if we do not pay attention to it specifically, really occurs as it is. Because part of the reality of something is how we regard it. If we regard with value the fire in the candle, then this is a humane fire. The small fire of a single wick in a candle ceases to be just a straw dunk, becomes a unifying flame. We could, with enough meditation, make it a sacred flame. And so, if heaven, earth, not Jen, not in that third place, Tao Te Ching, Li. If heaven, earth, not Jen, thereby the 10,000 things, busy straw dogs. Spirit Jen, not Jen, thereby the 100 families, busy straw dogs. The 100 families is a way of speaking symbolically, speaking about a sociological phenomenon that human life always has. The top 100 families, the models of human behavior. You hear a lot of psychological jargon about mythologies and mythological figures, but actually in human history, the patternings of families are much more powerful than what mythologies might convey. The Chinese phrase, 2,500 years ago, the 100 families, is like the phrase, the 10,000 things. The 100 families refers to this sociological realm where most of us really live, where our valuations, our models for living actually occur. When Spirit Jen, not Jen, thereby the 100 families, busy straw dogs. If there is no one spiritually present in the sociological realm, the sociological realm is a melee, a free-for-all. Even though there are the 100 families, they're not going anywhere effortlessly. They are going somewhere with great conniving and planning. Usually, in the Western educational outlook, early Renaissance Italy was taken as the example of what happens when there are many powerful families who live by vendettas and by conniving, and the whole social fabric depends upon who the godfather is of the most powerful family. Lao Tzu is saying, heaven, earth, not Jen, thereby the 10,000 things, busy straw dogs. Spirit Jen, not Jen, thereby the 100 families, busy straw dogs. Heaven, earth, its space itself is like a billows, indeed. Heaven and earth tend to come together, but they come together not in a causal way, but they come together like the way a billows comes together. The usefulness of their coming together is in the mutual space, and that spatiality is indexed by the spiritual presence of the true person. The true person is the index of that space. What the true person does, that's what that space is. If they are quiet, that space is quiet. If they apply themselves to something, that whole space becomes a background that allows that activity to occur. And so there's the Chinese character. After this long phrase, very long for Lao Tzu, heaven, earth, its space itself is like a billows. And the Chinese character here in chapter 5, after that, means indeed. The character is who. It's like an interjection. It's like when Lao Tzu has said something flat out, he will say, "A," or "indeed." This time he says "indeed." And immediately following that interjection, "indeed," is a pair of characters which mean "empty yet." And then the next pair of characters, "not collapse." And then another pair of characters, "moves yet." And then a pair, "continuing" or "continues emerging." So he uses here 4 pairs of characters after the interjection, "indeed." Empty yet, not collapse. Moves yet, continues emerging. And so by these 4 pairs, arranged in this quaternary like this, he makes a square. And then he shows that outside of that, beyond that, a boaster, frequently emptied, not likely to retain this middle. Somebody who talks beyond what succinctly needs to be said, empties the energy, wastes the psyche. Because when one has made a spiritual shape, that's it. Don't continue making it. When a spiritual shape is made, that's it. Let go. Because in letting go of it, that's where the equanimity is. In letting the spiritual shape just be. In letting a silence be. In letting just the right words be said and let them be. Comes that kind of articulation that allows then for the natural ecology of Tao to have its own movement without gaining some direction, some advantage in time-space. The Tao doesn't need to get there first. It doesn't need to be more powerful. It doesn't need to be higher. But occurs only when spiritual Jen, making this square of spiritual form, this equanimity of effortlessness, makes a spiritual form so that Tao comes through it. And comes through it to where? It comes through it directly to the world of the 10,000 things. So that very often, later on in China, hundreds and hundreds of years after the Huainanzi, which is 300 years after Lao Tzu, by the time that one gets to the early Tang dynasty, there was a beginning insight that there was something about the person, the spiritual person, in the natural setting. The first indications of it were always alongside some kind of a river. The earliest Chinese landscape paintings were all about Kukan Chi was the first landscape painter. And his first painting, the classic one, the only one that survived for 1400 years, is about the river nymphs of the low river. And they're not like bare-bosomed nymphs in a French salon painting, but they are very elegant women who, in their very careful, elegant movements, have been practicing being just themselves, exactly themselves, so that the movement of the stream, of the river flow behind them, unites them all as if their exact movements were the rhythms of the dance of life. And if one steps back and sees the whole of this entourage, this ensemble of people being exactly who they are, within a nature which is happening just as it is, this is the symbol then of that effortless Tao that returns back to the origin. And so landscape painting in China was born out of the realization that this is how one can express this. Chapter 6 is entitled Completing Form. And it's about woman. It's about not the feminine as the Jungians are so intent on emphasizing. It's not about a theme. It's not about gender. Lao Tzu speaks this way. Valley spirit, not death. This is called mysterious woman. Mysterious woman, herself, the gate. This is called heaven, earth, root. Constantly seems to reoccur, using itself no effort. But it's very difficult to hear Lao Tzu. Witness the way in which the three choices for alternative translators have dealt with this. The valley and the spirit never die. They form what is called the mystic mother, from whose gate comes the origin of heaven and earth. This, the origin, seems ever to endure. In use it can never be exhausted. That was Pu Chan Kao, and then Witter Banyer. The breath of life moves through a deathless valley of mysterious motherhood, which conceives and bears the universal seed, seeming of a world never to end, breath for men to draw from as they will, and the more they take of it, the more remains. And then Chang Chun-Yun. The spiritual reality of the void never ceases to exist. We call it the mystery of passivity. The entry to the mystery of passivity is the origin of the universe. Unceasing, it always remains. Drawn upon, it is never exhausted. And you can see that there are approximations. Lao Tzu is not an approximation. When he speaks, and in his writing is a way of speaking. When he speaks, it's like a laser that gives the exactness that is occurring. It's a language that is so refined that only when we relax out of time, relax out of causality, relax out of the compulsive press to line events together like beads in a row, when we relax from that ordering and deepen ourselves to an effortlessness, then this language from Lao Tzu simply occurs. Valley spirit, not death. This is called mysterious woman. Mysterious woman, herself the gate. This is called heaven, earth, root. Constantly seems to reoccur, using itself no effort. Now the title of this is Completing Form. Completing what form? Not completing a form by forcing a boundary to occur. That's like the Aristotelian Western idea. Unless the boundaries have been completed, you don't have the form. Oh, well, you can't say that such and such is a tragedy because such and such points are not met, they don't happen, therefore it's nothing. And if you carry that kind of expectation over, you can say, well, so-and-so is not a real person. They haven't met any of these criteria, any of these points. They're obviously just a man. Whereas in Lao-Tzu, whatever is actually the case is what it is. And if we can relax into that thusness, no matter who we are, where we are, that frees up this effortlessness and invites the Tao to sympathetically play through us. And all of the things of this world come into a harmony. I guess we need a break because the machines are. This process of coming out of this world into one's own presence is the alchemical process. The movement of that process is neither forward nor backwards, nor up nor down, but the movement is transformation. So one is not at all anxious to go anywhere else, to do anything else, or even to be anything else. Because the trigger of the transformation is equanimity. If you look at the really great, comprehensive alchemical illustrations, like the frontispiece to Heinrich Kunrath's The Theater of Eternal Wisdom, at the Theatricum Aeternis Sapientia. You see an alchemist's laboratory, and in the midst of the laboratory where all the technological equipment is, there's a prayer tent. The prayer tent is in the middle of the laboratory. Because it does no good to manipulate things to try to engender a transformation. If you manipulate things, they change in the sense of going forward and becoming something else in the line of development, but they do not transform. They go to the next stage along that line, which causality would follow. And so that you could say something causes this, this causes that, that causes that. But transformation is at the center. Because that line of causality is limited by reality. It cannot just go wherever it wants to go, but all lines of causality curve. They always curve. Someone is proud of their power, proud of their fame, and they think that they do events like a golfer hitting a tremendous drive, and they're going to send events off into the far fairway of success. They always curve. They come back around. So that given world enough in time, one would come to understand that the causal line is only the rim of circumstance and not the center of real change. The center is where the transformation happens. So one has to go to the center. That's why the whole object is to center yourself. The whole very early metaphor for this was working with clay on a wheel. As long as you worked with clay and you made clay pots and clay bowls by hand, they found that you could make the rings of clay, and you could arrange them and stack them and push them together and fire them up, and that was like the earliest forms of clay. But as soon as the wheel was brought into the ceramic, the pottery business, you put your lump of clay on the spinning wheel, and the first determination was where the center was. And you put both your thumbs in the center point of the clay in the spinning wheel, and with the touch of your fingers, you can form whatever shape you want. The fingers become wise. And they work with the rhythm of the center. The resonance is the rhythm of the center working out and making the form. Then when you fire a pot made on the wheel, it will last a very long time. There are pots made several thousand years ago that are still whole. But if you make lumped little cylinders of linked clay, those pots don't hold very long. They don't even take firing very long. It's like the personality that's made from the center, resonantly out, holds together forever. How is it going to? There's nothing to break. There are no moving parts to fix or change. And so the whole concern here is that the radiance of the center, which is the resonance, which is the whole return back to the origin. Going back to the origin is going to the center. Where is that center? Where is that origin? It's Tao. But you can't lift yourself up and put yourself in Tao. There's no place in time or space where Tao is a thing. And so you have to be wise, like a serpent, and gentle like a dove. You have to make a spiritual form of yourself. And the Tao then occurs there. It's like you invite it to occur in you because you have made this form and left it effortlessly to be just what it is. And so you are just as you are, not what you are. There's no identity equation in that at all. It's very subtle, but it's a major point. In this discussion of the financer, this return to the origin, it is the number one distinctive quality of the true man, the true person. He who can return to that which produced him as if he had not yet acquired physical form, we call him a true man. The true man is he who has not yet begun to differentiate himself from the great unity. The great unity being the Tai Chi, Tai Chi. The commentator writes this: it is this Taoist capacity to return to the origin that is attributed in this quotation to King Wu and the Duke of Luoyang. We know the centrality of the idea of the origin in Lao Tzu. No other theme, perhaps, is more important to understand the underlying notions of classical Taoism. In fact, someone did a survey one time and they found that this phrase, which means return to the origin, occurs in the Huainan about 90 times in 15 short little chapters. Time and time again, it's a recurrent theme. Because 300 years after Lao Tzu is what the intelligent human beings talking about what does this mean to us? How are we going to live with this? How can our lives express this? And how can we do this when we live in this kind of pressure cooker, which the Han Dynasty, which was like the Roman Chinese, had become? Just like events now. One feels sociologically constrained at every turn. There are taxes, there are payments, there are incomes to be had, and this is just money. And then there's children, and then there's food, and then there's just everything. Lao Tzu, in chapter 7, called Veiling the Radiant, speaks this way. Heaven eternal, earth lasting. Heaven, earth, reason, thereby enable the eternal and lasting, that thereby they not themselves live, correspondence can eternally live. Therefore spirit, Jen, behind his person, yet person emerges, not emphasizes his person, yet person perseveres. Thus, thereby, itself not selfish. A. Correspondence can accomplish itself's selffulness. Now I'm using English the way that Lao Tzu uses Chinese. He takes a sound palette, like an artist who would take a colored palette. He takes a vocabulary that is somewhat limited but well chosen, and then he uses variations of those words so that the sound and the variations of the words make a poetic pattern of insight. None of these other translations resonate to Lao Tzu. They don't use English the way Lao Tzu uses Chinese. They don't speak Lao Tzu. Here's how Chu Ta Kang translates this chapter. Chapter 7. Heaven is lasting and earth enduring. The reason why they are lasting and enduring is that they do not live for themselves. Therefore they live long. In the same way, the sage keeps himself behind, and he is in the front. He forgets himself, and he is preserved. Is it not because he is not self-interested that his self-interest is established? Now what's wrong with this is that this is language that's held out away from oneself to show someone else what you're saying. But Lao Tzu does not hold language out like that. He folds the language into himself, and then he does this transformation, and out of the effortlessness he speaks, and his whole person says the words. So that if we would like to hear Lao Tzu, we have to do likewise. We have to get in sync with him. We have to let go of time and commitments. And we have to relax into the center where a transformation can occur. And if we transform, we will with effortlessness hear Lao Tzu. Because he will not be speaking to us, but be speaking with us. Our hearing and his saying will be one thing. As someone once said, it's not like two sides of a coin, but it's like the coin dissolves into a vanishing point, carrying both sides with it at the same time. That mutual vanishing point is where Tao occurs. Here's how, to keep our order, the American poet translates. The universe is deathless because having no finite self, it stays infinite. A sound man, by not advancing himself, stays the further ahead of himself. By not confining himself to himself, sustains himself outside himself. But never being an end in himself, he endlessly becomes himself. Now this is what is called word play. It's not the same. There's not a transformation here. There is instead a mechanical distribution parading as transformation. What I used to call arcade games. The kind of writing that people who have just read James Joyce for the first time try to use a Joycean vocabulary to talk about their own egotistical lives, and it comes out garbled. It comes out as just word games. Chang Yun Chung translates it this way. The existence of heaven and earth are long-lasting. Their existences are long-lasting because they do not conceive of their existences as existences. Therefore, their existences are long-lasting. When the wise stays back, he steps forward. When he forgets his self, he finds his self. Is it not through selflessness that one achieves selfhood? Now this is wordplay with a philosophic tinge. This is like using some idea to whip the wordplay into tighter meaning. This is not it either. You can't use an idea to synthesize wordplay and expect it to convey the function of a true person spiritually harmonizing the cosmos. This takes place within a parenthetical dimension. In fact, someone like James Joyce could take something like this and play a game we used to play in the 60s called the Game of Parenthesis. We used to sit in high Teuton New Age seminars a quarter of a century ago and play the Game of Parenthesis. And whatever you would say or whatever you would do, someone would make a parenthesis around that and co-opt everything that you said and all of your energy into a higher level order. And someone else would do that to them. And it was a trick to stay interested long enough so that you could win. But the Game of Parenthesis is simply a bore. As Louis Jordan says in Gigi, it's a bore. You're not going to get the girl and you're not going to get the guy by playing the Game of Parenthesis. And Tao is not going to come in. Wisdom's not going to make her home where there's only a clever paint job. That's not it. She's not happy with that. She can't live with that. He is not going to stay around. So here's how Lao Tzu speaks. And I'm using English the way Lao Tzu uses his Chinese. Chapter 7, Veiling the Radiant. Why veil the radiant? The radiant is this center resonating out. If Tao is there in your spirit gem, that radiance is there. You don't even have to worry Is it there? The moment that you would worry, is it there? It's not there for sure. As someone once said a long time ago, the spirit of romance lifts her flowery skirts and runs away instantly to another dimension. She never heard of you. Because that kind of suspicion ruins the whole scene. And so, in veiling the radiant, Lao Tzu is saying, don't do this self-consciously. Just let it occur. The guarantee is that you, at your center, transform. And that way to the center is a letting go, a paring down. Now you can give it some kind of ideational tone. Western theological jargon says this is the via negativa instead of the via affirmativa. Instead of doing something, you not do progressively until there's nothing left to not do. That's also a word game. It also co-opts a great deal of excellence into games of parentheses. And eventually, it's really extraneous. Lao Tzu says this: heaven eternal, earth lasting, heaven earth, reason, thereby enable the eternal and lasting, that thereby they, not themselves live, correspondence can eternally live. He's not setting up this kind of mirror by saying, well, the earth is eternal and heaven's eternal. Saying the heavens, the stars, that realm is eternal. And the earth is lasting enough. Together, heaven, earth, together. Sometimes translated as this world. That's not the right way. Heaven, earth together. Where do heaven and earth come together? They only come together at a very special interface where there is someone. If there is not someone, heaven and earth do not meet, and there is no heaven, earth. The hyphen in heaven, earth is someone whose equanimity is actually occurring. Their heaven and earth meet in their equanimity. So that spiritual person actually is the only point of contact between the eternal and the lasting. It's the only real contact. One could sift through the whole universe in all of its dimensions, and you would never find any real contact anywhere if there were not spiritual presences, if there were not real beings, if there were not persons, and we're not the only essential form of life, but wherever any essential form of life is, their spiritual presence is the only place in which reality actually happens. It's like a fuse in an electric box that eventually, through oxidation, builds up a layer of patina that cuts off the current. Heaven and earth have no current between them at all, unless there is someone who has taken the patina off themselves and are just as they are spiritually. And so all the power of heaven's eternity and earth's lastingness exchanged through that person. All of it. And if there were only one person in the universe, they would be the only real thing there. But fortunately, there are many people, many spiritual beings, who are as real as they can be, as real as they are. One doesn't have to be super young, just to be who you are. with the exactness that you are. So he says, heaven eternal, earth lasting, heaven, earth, reason, thereby enable the eternal and lasting, that thereby they, not themselves, live, correspondence can eternally live. Therefore, spirit gen behind his person, he a person emerges, not emphasizes his person, he a person perseveres. Thus, thereby, itself not selfish. Correspondence can accomplish itself's selffulness. And chapter 8 comes into play. It bears the title, Easy Nature. Easy Nature. We get in refined English a term borrowed from the medieval French. The term is centre. Centre. It means to walk easy and gentle without being overly concerned about getting to your destination. In the medieval French, à la sentière means going to the Holy Land. But it means, in the high metaphor of the spiritual medieval French, not getting to Jerusalem, but getting to that Holy Land where you really are. Wherever God is, that's the Holy Land. So, à la sentière means going to that Holy Land. And when you realize that you don't have to go geographically thousands of miles, you relax and you begin to sing songs of spiritual love, like the troubadours in the medieval French tradition did. Instead of chanting those god-awful Latin phrases of theological points of argument, they use the same language to sing love songs. And so the Goyards transformed the Latin language back into what it was when Horace wrote. Out of that cribbed, garbled 6th century jargon back into the Latin when one could write like Catullus and mean it. Lao Tzu in chapter 8 relaxes in this way, and he sings this song. In classical Greek it would be called a paean, a song of praise in thanks for the divine allowing us to speak wholesomely and truthfully. And he says, highest goodness resembles water. Water goodness benefits the 10,000 things, yet no quarrels. Dwells in all gem, itself a place never approached. Correspondence approaches to Tao. Centering chooses grounding. Heart chooses growing. Generosity chooses humanity. Language chooses heartfulness. Government chooses order. Business chooses ability. Movement chooses rhythm. For busy, not quarreling. Correspondence, not rejected. Now that's what he says. See how our translators handle this. Chutakao, the highest goodness is like water. Water is beneficent to all things, but does not contend. Therefore it stays in places which others despise. Therefore it is near to Tao. In dwelling, think it is a good place to live. In feeling, make the heart deep. In friendship, keep on good terms with men. In words, have confidence. In ruling, abide by good order. In business, take things easy. In motion, make use of the opportunity. Since there is no contention, there is no blame. Now that's sort of like the extended fortune cookie school of translation. It makes a kind of little snippets of Confucian aphorisms out of what is a song of praise let loose. Here's how the American poet translates it. Man at his best, like water, serves as he goes along. Like water, he seeks his own level, the common level of life. Loves living close to the earth, living clear down in his heart. Loves kinship with his neighbors, the pick of words that tell the truth, the even tenor of a well-run state, the fair profit of able dealing, the right timing of useful deeds, and for blocking no one's way, no one blames him. Now it's kind of like a hobo's litany, that it's okay to ride the rails free. It's not really it either. Lao Tzu is very, very elegant. He's not a hobo. He's very, very elegant. He is like an aristocrat of the spirit. He is able to speak plainly and exactly and say what he in say is. Here's how the translation comes out in this Heideggerian existential influence translation. That which is best is similar to the water. Water profits 10,000 things and does not oppose them. It is always at rest in humble places that people dislike. Thus it is close to town. Therefore, for staying, we prefer a humble place. For minds, we prefer profundity. For companions, we prefer the kindness. For words, we prefer sincerity. For government, we prefer good order. For affairs, we prefer ability. For actions, we prefer the right time. Because we do not strive, we are free from fault. Now again, this language is like the language of a favorite list. It stacks sentences and phrases like a list. Lao Tzu is not doing that at all. He is allowing resonant waves of radiance to simply occur, and as they occur, this amplitude of openness occurs and extends itself out so that he ends it by saying, for busy not quarreling, correspondence not rejected. The Tao, which inhabits the spiritual presence, not only fills the person, but goes through the person and fills the world with the harmony. So that one's person, being the bridge between heaven and earth, is not like some kind of negligible mortar holding two great systems together. The eternal system of heaven mortared into the long-lasting system of earth, and what is man? A little bit of blood and bone for 80 years or something. That's not it at all. Lao Tzu is saying, we are the only gateway in which these two orders meet and become one. Their whole reality occurs because we occur with them. If we did not, they would not meet. They would not touch at all. In ancient times, there was always a mystical, magical quality about meteorites. It was a bit of heaven that had fallen to earth. It was, get this, a bit of heaven that had touched earth. And it always meant, in every culture, in every people the world round for all time, it meant that some great person had been born. Only when a bit of heaven, like a spark of light, touches the earth, it must mean then that some great spiritual presence has come into life, come into being. See? Now I've done 4 chapters, but in order to catch us up, I've done a 5th chapter for today, because we have only 7 weeks left, and we want to do 4 each of the 7 weeks, and because the last ones of the Tao have a lot of intensity. The intensity builds. It's not like everything is always the same, but there's a structure of natural dramaticness in the Tao Te Ching. And we have to hopefully be grand enough in attentiveness to allow for Lao Tzu's dramatic structure to build. So chapter 9, exercising the Placid. I won't read their translations, they just, they're not written yet, frankly. Holding yet filling. It not likely itself only. Handled yet sharpening, it not able long to be kept. Gold jewels decorate their hall. Nobody their self can protect. Wealthy, exalted, yet haughty, they exact their misfortune. Merit accomplishes name, completed person returns to heaven, itself down. Now that's how his Chinese speaks, if you just use English. Is it close? Holding yet filling, it not likely itself only. We usually think in a causal, worldly way that if you hold something, you have the thing. But in the Tao, you don't hold by grasping. You hold by offering an openness which accepts the resonance of whatever is there. Holding, yet filling, it not likely itself only. Handled, if you grasp something, it becomes more and more what it is, and it drops out of the Tao into just being a thing. So that something sharpens and sharpens and sharpens the more you grasp it, so that it's only then just this. It's worse than coming up empty-handed. One comes up with just a dead thing. Handled yet sharpening, if it not able long to be kept. And then he takes this whole sense that we hold without grasping. We hold by offering an openness which allows for whatever correspondences really occur to actually occur. How do lovers know they belong together? Because they occur together. You couldn't miss it. How does a child know that this is its mother? They occur together. When we see something that calls out to us as we, and our seeing of it appreciated, we belong together. It's the whole principle of art. The whole principle of beauty is that one's seeing occurs at the same time, the same level of valuation that the art calls out to us. So that the appreciation is the being together. And the more that that happens, the more that that correspondence amplifies and builds, the more then that beauty becomes sublime. Gold, jewels decorate their hall. Nobody, their self, can protect. If you think that by having things, and the proverbial gold and jewels, filling your home, the more and more isolated you become away from the Tao, away from the universe of correspondence, no one in this isolated individuality misunderstood can protect what they have. You become more and more a target for what? For the misfortune which you yourself have created, not just by amassing things, but by isolating yourself from the correspondences where resonance and life occur. Gold, jewels decorate their hall. Nobody their self can protect. Wealthy, exalted, yet haughty, they exact their misfortune. Merit accomplishes name. Completed person returns to heaven itself, down. And so this return to heaven, this return to the origins, characterizes the Tao Te Ching. Now we're going to go to 10, 11, and 12, 10, 11, 12, and 13 next week. Try something. If you have a couple of translations of the Tao Te Ching at your house, the 10th of these chapters is kind of interesting. I'd like to see if some of you could just make an attempt to try and put it into your own words. And I won't bring any of these translations. I'll bring my own. But I would like to have a chance for you, with the 10th chapter, to just have a chance to say, to make an attempt to make a translation for yourself. It doesn't have to, quote, be good. It has to be yours. The whole object is not for it to be, pristinely great or something like that, but simply that you put your own life tone and energy into play in this language way. Now there's a bit of a magic that's here. There's a very ancient magic here. If you will do this and have the humility and courage to just bring it and read it, the accumulated readings of such an operation brings what is called the well of understanding into being. Now, the most ancient of all the forms of centering in China was that kind of tic-tac-toe structure where you take 2 lines horizontally, 2 lines vertically, and then you have 9 spaces. 8 families occupied the outer spaces and shared a mutual well in the center. So that the earliest form of Chinese community was always the 8 families around a single dwelling. That's the earliest archaic form of Chinese sense of patterning. So very often, when Lao Tzu uses the Chinese character for dwells, by which we would understand presencing, it harkens back to this common well. But whereas, in an agricultural milieu, in an agricultural world, a shared well is really the nourishing fulcrum of survival, of life. In a sociologically more differentiated civilization, language is the common ground. And the sharing of language together is always the well of understanding. That's why all religions have common prayers. That's why all great cultures and civilizations have poetry which is mutually learned, recited together. So if you will try with chapter 10, and it's simply entitled Nam Hui, Suzuki translates it, what can be done. It literally means, the American phrase would be can do. Can do. My translation would be an interrogative, can busy. Suzuki translates it, what can be done. Here is the way that Chu Cha Kao translates chapter 10, just to give you a leg up on this. Can you keep the soul always concentrated from straying? Can you regulate the breath and become soft and pliant like an infant? Can you clear and get rid of the unforeseen and be free from fault? Can you love the people and govern the state by non-action? Can you open and shut the gates of nature like a female? Can you become enlightened and penetrate everywhere without knowledge? So that the whole of chapter 10 is this kind of going on. Can you? Can you? Now remember that as long as the can yous are just stacked like rolled clay, when you fire it in the inner integration of transformation, it's likely going to crack. What's the point of transformation then? To remember that all of the pressures in transformation are distributed to the center. So that if you take the structural lines that hold it together to the center in the first place, when the fires of transformation come, they will only strengthen the pot and not crack it. How do you put all of the structures at the center? By making it from the center outward in the first place. So that's what this chapter is all about. Try, if you will. I will share your translations, and I'll share mine, and next week we will do 10, and I'll bring in 11, 12, and 13 students.